everybody. It's really good to see all of you. Some new faces as well. Thank you for joining us. And obviously, I'm here today to talk to you, like Sarah said, about functional safety in open source software. So the point is it a reality? Is it doable? Or is it just our wishful thinking? And I'm going to try not to bore you too much with details about myself. This can work now? Okay. So just a little bit about myself. I've been in the automotive industry for a bit over 20 years. Yeah, I know, somehow it's unfortunate because I've only seen this industry. I've been doing all sorts of things related to software development, testing, project management, processes, quality assurance, you name it. And I got to the point that I think processes is the key point in the whole picture. Because without any process, everything is going to be ad hoc. So that's my focus nowadays. Obviously, you can reach out to me on email, on LinkedIn as well, on Slack, on our channels. So if you have any questions or want to talk about anything related to SDV, reach out. Don't be shy. Now, about our agenda, I'm just going to give you a short intro to the working group, just very tiny, because I know Sarah already did the intro. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between the corporate environment and the open source environment when it comes to processes in particular. And then we're going to go and see how the Eclipse SDV working group is bridging this gap between the two worlds that are currently kind of set apart. We'll also do a little bit of an intro to the ThreadX project, stuff that probably you've heard over in Frederick's talk this morning. Or if you haven't, maybe this will trigger your interest and go over that talk's slides later on. And then we'll look into what's the usage readiness for some of the projects within our working group. And then let's just discuss what keeps us up at night when it comes to this topic in particular. So, about our working group. As you can see, it's a very tiny spot over there. Yeah, I can't make it work now. It's a very tiny spot over there within our multiple collaborations there. But it's quite strong. You probably heard Mike's keynote. It's a fast-growing community, a fast-growing working group, and it definitely deserves everybody's attention nowadays. We started from two big points, a mission and a goal. And these mission and goal brought us to think about how exactly do we want to achieve the final goal, which is building a full distribution software distribution stack, right? How exactly do we want to go there? How do we want to ensure that this distribution stack is actually going to be used in future vehicles that we'll be seeing on the streets in the next years? And as you know, we are all used to look at the corporate environment putting vehicles out there on the streets, right? But then we're here to talk about open source projects, open source software. And now when we are to compare the corporate environment projects and the open source environment projects, there are quite some differences, strong ones at least in my view. On the corporate side of things, you have like really strict management, right? It's appointed, it's there, whether you like it or not, you got to deal with it, right? You also have a strict budget. You might have a margin to deal with, but it's really strict. You can't really go off the bounds. You also have a strict timeline, because obviously you have production lined up, so you need to meet that deadline. You also have a strict developing and testing team. Again, they are appointed teams. Okay, so you can't really go out and say, as a project manager, let's say, I don't like the team that I'm working with. I want it to change. It's not going to happen. And you also have limited time for investigation and innovation, because of the limited time allocated for the project itself. Now, when it comes to open source projects, well, first of all, they are open, right? So they are open to everyone to contribute. if they want to do so. They're also transparent, so the decisions made within the project, by the project team, by the project leads, those are transparent. Everybody has access to seeing those decisions. They might not be able to directly influence them. They can influence them in the long term, but they can see them. Sometimes in the corporate environment, you don't even get to know what the decision was. And they are also based on meritocracy. So the committers and the project leads are chosen from and by the community. That's a completely different game than within the corporate environment, right? Now, when it comes to processes, there's also differences there between the two types of environments. In the corporate environment, the processes are heavy. They are very strict. They are sometimes very hard to understand as well. And they actually generate more effort. While on the other side of things, so in the open source environment, the processes tend to be really straightforward because they need to be understood by everybody that might be contributing to the project. They are short and crisp, they use easy language, and they actually generate improvements rather than extra efforts. So, are there any differences? Well, yes, of course. And we have here a wish list for collaboration from the industry side. And we also have the open source world. So to underline these differences, well, the industry wants to reduce complexity. It also wants to standardize below value line building blocks. It also wants to improve software sustainability and maintenance, and reusability, and maturity and component certifiability. On the other hand, in the open source world, we see there's no consensus driven, there is no long-term milestone planning, there's no mandatory process for the project, no single architecture, but still multiple building blocks. There's the whole environment is highly fragmented, but also fast evolving. But there's also a heterogeneous community. Now, taking all of this into account and looking at our working group, the Eclipse SDV working group, we want to know how exactly we are bridging this gap, because we already started working on this. There's more to come, but we'd like you to know how far we've gone so far. So taking the picture again without the troubled waters underneath, and building that bridge between it, we do want to emphasize that our working group is the bridge between the two worlds. And what it brings to actually establish that bridge, it brings established governance. It brings special interest groups on automotive-grade open source, or better said, automotive processes. It brings architecture alignment and interfaces definition. And it brings series-ready open source projects. And now to go into some details there, what exactly do we do to bridge this gap? So first of all, our big motivation in this direction, there are many points to discuss about our motivation, but the biggest one is the fact that we want this working group to succeed and deliver what it set out to do. And the methods that we've chosen so far to use in order to bridge the gap are defining and putting in place an SDV process. We already have a release, the first one. This SDV process is a high-level ASPICE requirements alignment. So practically what we did as a community, and some of you in the audience know because you participated in this, we took some of the main requirements of the ASPICE standard process model and brought them into the SDV process, worked them out from the open source perspective, and laid them down there as a foundation for the SDV process. Then we were also thinking, okay, but we want people out there to see that this SDV process is actually followed, is adhered to. So we came up with the concept of maturity badges. Through these maturity badges, what we aim is to reflect the quality status and level against the requirements within the SDV process. Further on, looking at the functional safety part of things, because that's the hot topic, not just around this talk, but in general in the automotive industry, we started looking at building a safety-critical development process. So it's all functional safety, let's say, driven, but from a development perspective, from an open source perspective. And then we're also looking at building a supporting tool chain that is actually going to help the projects adhere to the processes, SDV process, as well as the functional safety development process, in order to have the projects adhere to those two processes. We also need the tools to do so in a fastest manner. To talk a little bit about the SDV process, as you probably know very well, the current state is that within the automotive companies, so the corporate environment, we have pretty much 3 pillars. Well, on one hand, we have ASPICE as a process model. Then we have the automotive functional safety standard. And then we have the automotive cybersecurity standard. Of course, there's also SOTIV, and there's other standards as well that you might be looking at. But these, at least in my view, are the key 3 ones. All the other ones can be derived out of these 3 ones. While looking at the automotive from an open source perspective, we practically, at least within the Eclipse Foundation and within the Eclipse Foundation projects, we practically had 2 types of processes or standards, to put it like that. On one hand, we had the OSPOs, okay, so the open source program offices that hopefully have been established around all the corporate environments that work with open source software. And then on the other hand, we also had the Eclipse Foundation development process, which is already applied on all of the Eclipse Foundation projects, not just on the Eclipse SDV projects. Now, what we want to get to within the automotive market, whether we talk about the corporate environment or we talked about open source environment, just in general, the market, we'd like to see OSPOs well set up across the board. We'd like to see the Eclipse Foundation development process, because it's already there. And we'd like to see the Eclipse SDV process. Now, we did talk about this long ago, probably for like a year or even more. This SDV process is actually going to expand. As given the hint previously, we're going to expand it into the functional safety, Eclipse Foundation functional safety development process. On the SDV process, just a little bit of a status so that in case you're not aware of it, you can become aware of it. We have 5 process criteria defined so far, very basic. We don't want to go over the board. We just want to make sure that those criteria are actually applied and people know what they mean. These criteria are requirements, testing, documentation, coding guidelines, and release processes. Obviously, each of these criteria come with some elements within. You can read more about them at the link that's over there in the bubble definition of badges and their flavors. And then we have 2 more criteria, which we kind of included, sort of. One is the integration. So what's the capability of the respective projects to be integrated with other Eclipse SDV projects? This is also the blueprints that Sarah was referring to earlier today. And the second criteria is the OSS best practices, and that kind of aligns with the Eclipse development process as well. Now, leaving the SDV process aside just for a second, and looking at the projects themselves, now talking strictly from an open source software perspective. So you look at the open source software project, and you might experience it from different perspectives, depending on your role towards that project. So if you are the project team, you might wonder, where are we actually with the project towards achieving the end goal? And you'd like to know how to position yourself there. on that journey. If you are a committer, maybe not particularly on that project, but you'd like, or you are considering becoming a committer for that project, you'd like to know how can you make use of your skill set to actually help out the project. And finally, if you are none of the above, but you are a potential adopter, you ask yourself, why the hell should I adopt that project? I mean, is it, yeah, okay, maybe it's a cool project, but what's the incentive? What's in it for me? Okay, it's always that question, right? So, because all of these questions probably popped in your heads, depending on the role that you fulfilled so far around the project, we thought the maturity badges would be a good way of helping each of you answer your questions. This is just a show-off of the badges that will soon be popping on our websites. They have been defined and designed around the 5 criteria within the SDV process that I mentioned earlier. So again, documentation, requirements, coding guidelines, testing, and release process. They needed to be more like icon-driven so that they can be proper badges. And they also needed to show the level of maturity rather than be an award. Okay? So we're not talking about first place, second place, third place. There are no prizes here. Everybody receives prizes because, first of all, they are open source projects, right? They deserve to be praised. But when it comes to the actual maturity, we want to know the nitty-gritty details. You might have requirements on the last level, on the highest level, but maybe you're not doing so well with the release process. Maybe your release process is so basic that you only achieve level 1. And that might be good enough for the type of project that you have. So again, this is not to award something or to slap projects over their hands, on their wrists for doing something wrong, or praise them for doing something good. It's to show where exactly are we within that project. And as an example, because we were talking about one of the criteria, so for the requirements criteria, the criteria itself is referring to the requirements of a given project, whichever that project is. And it's asking whether the requirements exist, if they are properly managed, meaning change management, version management, if they are traced throughout the project from beginning to the end, and so on and so forth. So to get a feeling of these levels within the criteria and resulting into the badges, the first level for the requirements would be, are the project requirements documented? I don't care how, maybe you have them in an Excel, maybe you have them in a markdown file, it doesn't matter. Are they documented? That's all there is to it. A second level would be, are the requirements comprehensible? And do we have 100% of the exposed feature in there? And also, are there changes tracked in the release notes? So it's not about having a full traceability of those requirements, but do we know for each release which requirements we have covered? And finally, the top level, at least so far in our definition, is whether the requirements are referenced by commits and PRs and test cases. So this would sort of enhance that requirements traceability that we were talking about. Now, the next thing coming is, as I referred to earlier, the safety critical development process, or how we call it now, the functional safety process. We are looking at the big picture, at systems, not just at one particular project. Granted, we've started from one particular project, but we want to grab the whole picture and get it into that. We have started from the requirements, let's say, around safety critical systems and the development practices around that. We've also looked at our already existing Eclipse intellectual property policy, at the Eclipse development practices, and the Eclipse development process. And now, out of the whole thing, this is what's supposed to emerge. As news, probably you've heard it already also from Frederick's talk earlier today, also a little bit mentioned in Mike's keynote. We've already started working on this. We're very soon going to present to the community a draft, well, a straw man that anybody will have the chance to stab. And putting aside the blood afterwards, we're going to try to improve that first draft. The goal for us is to not only develop it and establish it and deploy it within our projects, but rather getting it a level further, actually. Try and get it as a standard for open source projects that are safety critical. And related to that, we have the Eclipse ThreadX, which is actually an Eclipse SDV project, right? And you probably heard already. It is the first certified open source RTOS out there. I can proudly say that we've obtained the certifications in our name 3 weeks ago, 4th or 5th of October. So not too long ago, but it's been a joyous moment, I can tell you that. What we did in order to start developing that functional safety development process was to take a lot of the practices that we've noticed within the Eclipse ThreadX projects and collect them and try to conclude them towards a more straightforward description of a process. I don't want to bore you with too many details about ThreadX, but I do invite you to have a look within it. It has 6 components mainly. It's open. The GitHub repository is available for any of you. Documentation is there as well. Test cases are there as well. We can offer also support from our side as Eclipse Foundation, but also from the community. The community, unfortunately, is not yet as developed as we'd wish, but hopefully now that we have the certs in place, this will change. And yeah, we're looking forward to the next release, which will be a full open source software release. So I invite you all to get your noses into that. As said before, it is a certified project. Okay, so first of all, it's a project. Secondly, it's a product. Thirdly, it's fully certified, both on functional safety, but also on cybersecurity. We also intend to maintain those certifications in both directions. And what's the actual status today for ThreadX? Well, as said, it's fully operational. The code is available, as said, in GitHub. The safety certifications for the 6.1.x releases have just been transferred to us. And the next step in the pipeline for us is to certify the 6.4.x release, which is still a contribution from Microsoft. So the development wasn't done in the open source ecosystem. Therefore, we still have time to work on the safety process, on the functional safety process, because it's not going to have affected the 6.4.x releases. But after that one, the next release, that's going to be the challenging one. That's going to be the one that I'm looking forward to as well. And also, we have the special interest group, the ThreadX special interest group. If you're already part of the SDV working group, you know about that, hopefully. And hopefully you are participating in those meetings as well. And the last big news around it, now that we also have the certifications, we were able to launch the ThreadX Alliance, which, in case you heard, you're going to hear it again. In case you didn't, as just a means for us to secure funding for the further certification of this project and product. How exactly it fits within the SDV working group? Well, we have the ThreadX as a project. We have the ThreadX Alliance that I just mentioned, and then we have the ThreadX Special Interest Group. Now, the ThreadX Special Interest Group is one of the SIGs of the SDV working group. The ThreadX as a project is one of the projects in the purview of the SDV working group. The Alliance, though, is something outside of those two bubbles, or three, if we were to take the SDV working group into account as well. It's still very much linked to the ThreadX project itself. And again, as discussed. Now, what exactly the rationale behind the ThreadX Alliance was? Again, the significant interest towards ThreadX, especially when it comes to safety-related documentation. Again, being the first, not just RTOS, but in general, open source project that is literally certified from a functional safety perspective. It's a big question mark in everybody's heads. How exactly do you do it? How do you do it in open source? Is it real? Are you sure you actually got it? And obviously, people will want to dig more into how exactly it was done. And this is one way of opening the door to more knowledge, to more experience, to hands-on experience, and to also fund the ongoing certification for the project. So by joining the ThreadX Alliance, if you're not a member already of the SDV working group, to have access to the safety documentation, all you need to do is to join the Alliance. And you have some links here, how to get in touch with people on the projects, how to view the channels, the mailing list, different websites. The ThreadX Alliance website is also up and running now, so we'll send you that link as well, though it's quite easy to figure it out. It's here. And finally, why is this project so important to us? Well, again, first of all, it's the first open source project that has been properly certified for functional safety. The second reason is we intend to keep doing that. So it's not just about development done on this project, but it's also about keep getting those certifications for the different releases. Obviously, we'll need to make plans together with the community, of course, on what releases will need to be certified, what will not be certified, and so on and so forth. But it's also a key element in helping us to develop this safety-critical development process. So it's not a tiny thing. It might look tiny, but it's making quite some waves. And obviously, if you have any questions about ThreadX, just contact us directly, either Frederick or myself. Now, seeing all of those details from like the sidelines of the discussion, right? How exactly is the course line of the SDV working group when it comes to all of this? Well, as we said before, our aim is to have an open technology platform for the software-defined vehicle of the future. How we've done that so far? Well, we talked about the SDV process. I can give you a little number there. We already have 7 of the Eclipse SDV projects that have adopted the SDV process, and they'll soon show that. We have high interest and involvement in the generic architecture definition, which is currently being discussed within the TAC meetings. We have Thilo here, who's leading those meetings, and thank you for the involvement there. We also have high interest and involvement in the functional safety development process definition. As you probably know, we have this automotive processes for OSS SIG, where such topics are discussed. And we also have high interest and involvement in the supporting toolchain definition. So we're looking at the different tools that our projects have already started using. One of them could be Open Fast Trace. which is very good when it comes to requirements traceability. Basic, but it delivers what you need. So we look at all these aspects, and they are all converging to this road that we've taken and we intend to walk on. So what the future is bringing, well, it's bringing those badges, which will be displaying on the different websites. So if you're familiar with this view, this is the list of projects that you get from the eclipse.org website. You typically get the icon, the logo of the project. You get a little bit of detail towards that project. You have download section. Well, you are going to have an additional section, which is going to display all the badges that the respective project has earned. We'll also be displaying those badges on the PMI pages of each of the projects. And finally, if you have like a separate website for your project, we'll assist you into displaying those badges directly there. And the last but not the least of what the future is bringing is, well, we'll have a set of practices which will end up into this process that I told you about, which is going to be safety critical driven. It's going to be focused on development. It is focused on development, but aiming towards certification. And when I say certification, I don't just mean projects. We also are looking towards standardizing this process for open source projects that deal with critical safety elements. And last but not least, here's what keeps us up at night. So I'll be happy to hear your questions. Hopefully I'll also be able to answer them, or just to have a discussion. Hi, sure.
So, yeah, so we know already what... maybe I can ask the next speaker to get the microphone. That would be great. Yes, Wolfgang, what keeps you up at night?
Thanks. Many things, but let me talk about a question. So I just wanted to know, who designs the SDV process and who decides on it? And the same question for, you said help wanted, but in the end, who designs the functional safety process and who decides on it? And then a third question, will all projects be, will it be mandatory for all the projects to adopt these processes? You said 7 are already taking it, but will it in the end be mandatory?
Very good questions.
Yep.
Very good questions. Thank you. I'll try to answer them one by one. So first of all, as a generic answer, nothing is decided or defined just by the Eclipse Foundation staff. Just to be clear, we're all about the community here. We are built on top of the community. Without the community, we wouldn't exist. The SDV process was defined by the community. Okay, Sarah and I moderated the discussions. We facilitated. But the actual definition was done by the community. Some of the community members were more involved than others, and obviously their voices were heard faster than others, or heard, period. And that's how it happens. When you have a community, when you have stronger voices or stronger opinions. But if you want to be involved, all you got to do is show up. So it's a community effort. It's not just the decision that is made by the community, it's the effort that is put up front by the community. And yeah, finally the decision is made by the community. Now, second question about the functional safety process, the Eclipse Foundation functional safety development process. The first draft is being done by us, the Eclipse Foundation staff. Mainly, like almost 5 of us, I'd say. But the point is just to give a structure, a straw man for the community to poke What we've seen is that when you start from something, however that little something is, or however wrongly put it is, it's still better than starting from scratch, especially with engineers. And I can say that from my own experience. And finally, the third question about adopting the processes. Well, there's two aspects here, okay? So the SDV process is not mandatory. Any project can adopt it if they want to. It's no rocket science there. As you could see, there are 5 top criteria, really easy to adhere to. In my view, those are best practices of software development. It's not a big deal to do it. If you want to do it, you can adopt the SDV process. If you don't, nobody's forcing you to do so. But when it comes to the Eclipse Foundation functional safety development process, that will be a tiny bit different story. And the reason is the projects that will want to be put out there as functional safety related projects will need to follow that process. Practically what we intend to have for those projects once they follow the process is to have them certification ready. We're not going to do the certifications for the projects unless the funding is gathered for that, obviously. But if the projects themselves want to do it with private funding, or if the adopters want to certify the respective projects from their own funding, they will be able to do so because the projects will be ready for certification. So that's the tiny difference there, meaning that the adhering to the process will be a little bit more strict. I hope that answers your questions.
Yeah, maybe just to add to what you already mentioned it, but just a reminder for everyone. So the Eclipse Foundation has put together this functional safety development process, but we also have a special interest group that wants to talk about the process. So what we are trying to have here is present what we've been working on from our side and have it discussed and agreed or modified within the special interest group. So if you have an interest or want to contribute to the process definition, the right place to be is the special interest group, so that Dana presents what we as foundation have come up with, and then we see what we can use, what we can transfer in the working group.
Yeah, thank you for that mention, actually. To expand a little bit even more on that, within the special interest group, we don't just talk about the process, but we also talk about what are the plans, what do we intend to create, because it's not just the process. We will need to train the teams working on the projects that want to adopt this process into using the process, right? Further on, we're going to have all these tools supporting this process. People working on those projects will need to learn how to use those tools. So do we want to create training material, presentations, and so on and so forth? So it's not just the process itself. There's all these little elements around it that make it stronger and more ingrained into the projects that we'll need to take into account as well. All of those are being discussed within the SIG that Sarah mentioned.
Yes. So I have a question regarding the maturity badges. Who and how they are decided? Like, is it open for everybody to rate? Like, is it for the community, for open source, or is it like maybe a little bit limited to some like deciders or like a special interest groups?
Well, one thing to mention about that, and again, it's a very good question. Thank you for raising it. One thing to say about the maturity badges right now is that the way they've been set up, and also because not so many projects have already taken on board the SDV process, we are doing automatic checks of the criteria. We are first looking at the first level. Obviously, we're starting step by step, right? There's no point into jumping all in if we don't know how to swim. So we're looking at the first level right now. Those badges are earned through automatic evaluations. We already have the scripts in place, and probably even before the end of next month, we're going to have the badges displayed for these projects on the websites. So this is the first step, but we are not ending things there. The second step, because obviously things are going to start getting more and more complicated, where you can't use automation anymore. You're going to have to step in with some human interaction, like a proper review of the requirements, for example. I mean, do they actually make sense? Are they atomic or not? Or they're just stories written on the wall, you know? So you'll need a human mind to actually dig into those and see whether they are worthy of the level 3 maturity badge, right? So as a second step, our intention is to appoint evaluation committee. We don't know yet where exactly this will emerge from. It's something that we need to decide on as a community. But we'll appoint a committee that will do the evaluations. Obviously, the parts of the evaluations that cannot be done automatically.
Maybe I have a follow-up. Like, do you think like having like a Gen AI would be a good alternative for this? To be the one who decide the badges, or it's not?
Sorry, could you speak up a bit?
Like to use generative AI to award the badges, is it something to be considered, or it's all going to be human-based community?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, thanks, Dana, for the presentation. I really like the direction that Eclipse SDV is taking with all these kind of steps regarding functional safety. Questions especially around ThreadX. So it's good that you highlight kind of that there's a functional safety certification, but as always, you don't know which kind of, what are the assumptions of use, what is the context, hardware dependencies, tool chain, and I don't think anything of that is available. So perhaps you can comment on that. Another thing that I'll have in mind is now there is a dedicated version of ThreadX which has been certified. You're in the process to get another version certified. So who is defining which version gets certified, which functions are involved, and last but not least, who is maintaining this kind of versions? Because for automotive, we envision to have that 10 years minimum available and maintained.
All very good questions, so thank you for raising those. I'll start with the first one, right? So first of all, the certificates themselves, we haven't linked them yet to the website because they still need to pop on the TÜV website. But the certificates themselves mention the clauses of the 4 functional safety related standards that the product adheres to. So you can get the details from there. But just as a hint, it's certified somewhat differently than what you might expect for, let's say, an automotive software application, because we're talking about an RTOS. So we're not looking at the RTOS strictly from an automotive perspective. We're looking at it from a functional safety perspective from the automotive view, okay? So it's somewhat out of context that it has been certified. However, it is certified, meaning that it shows, or the certificate attests that it has adhered to all the practices that functional safety requires for such products. Your second question, how do we decide which versions do we certify, which we don't? So first of all, we certified the 6.1.x versions because that was the last version of ThreadX that was certified by Microsoft. And we wanted to pick things from where Microsoft left it. So first of all, we wanted to make sure that the certificates are for real and sort of transfer that ownership to the Eclipse Foundation and to the Eclipse ThreadX project. The next version we're going to certify is the 6.4 because that's the last release that was made. And as said before, it's still a release that was made by Microsoft. And the version after that is going to be the first open source developed release. So obviously, we'll want to certify that one to make sure that we have proof of how exactly does this process work. It's going to be a very insightful certification process to do on that version because it's going to feed into the process itself as well, not just the practices around the project. Further on, what we'll do in the future, that all depends on the community around ThreadX. So ThreadX as a project still needs an actual project lead. Currently, our colleague Frédéric Desbiens, he's kind of acting as a project lead, which shouldn't happen, but we're willing to do that if that gets things going. Hopefully now that we have the certificates in place, we'll get more attention, draw more people on board to the project. And secondly, we need committers, right? I mean, the project lead doesn't make the decisions by himself or herself. So they'll make the decision together with the project team. And they'll look through the, let's say, requests from the community that come through the issues of the project, and they'll start making a plan. This is what we need, this is what we need, the other thing, and so on and so forth.
So we have one last question, just 10 seconds.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. I really like the system with the badges. One thing I didn't really understand, or I don't think it was mentioned, how and if they are re-evaluated over time, because those projects change, and you all know that some projects just die, and then you'll still have those badges that are not the truth anymore, so they have to be updated, right?
That's a very good point, good question. Thank you for that. Actually, we thought about that, amazingly enough. And what we thought is that it's only fair to evaluate projects on certain releases. We're not going to evaluate the project in the middle of their development cycle from a release to another. And the badges will be earned per release. So let's say your release 2.5.3 looks like everything's ad hoc, and your 4.5.0 looks brilliant. That's the difference between the releases. But then that's what will help your adopters, because they will know which of the versions that you released can I actually use. Or, I mean, in theory, you can use any of the releases, right? Yeah. But which one of them am I going to have less trouble in actually integrated within my system?